What up, my friend? My name is Adam with Faith Labs. We do daily devotionals for busy Christians. Today's devotional is titled The Prophet Who Wanted to Die. Let's get into it. A man sits under a scraggly tree in the middle of nowhere, staring at nothing. His clothes, they're torn, his lips are cracked, and he's having a conversation with God that sounds more like a resignation letter than a prayer. I've had enough, Lord. Just take my life. I'm no better than my ancestors who died before me. This isn't some random desert wanderer having a breakdown. This is Elijah, the prophet who just called down fire from heaven and humiliated 450 false prophets in the most epic spiritual showdown in history. See, just 24 hours ago, he was standing on Mount Carmel watching God incinerate a water-soaked altar while thousands of people fell on their faces shouting, "The Lord is God." And now he's begging to die. For a long time, I used to think that spiritual giants were immune to depression. Like, once you reach a certain level of faith, your brain chemistry, it just operates the way it's supposed to, cooperates with you. Mental health, it just becomes a non-issue because look, you've got God figured out. Then I read 1 Kings chapter 19, and I realized that even God's MVP, he can find himself in a hole that's so dark that death feels like relief. And suddenly every night that I spent face down on my bathroom floor during the depths of my alcoholism, it seemed to make a lot more sense. You know that feeling when you finally accomplish something that's really big for you? You land the job, you finish a huge project, you win the argument, and instead of celebration, you just feel empty. Like you thought success would fill whatever was broken inside of you, but it didn't even touch it. I was thinking about that when I came on this story again, because Elijah just had the victory of a lifetime. I'm talking about the kind of spiritual win that should have set him up for life. The ultimate God moment that proved everything that he'd been preaching. But here's what no one prepared me for. Sometimes your biggest spiritual victories, they can trigger the darkest emotional crashes. And then what God does with his suicidal prophet, it completely rewrote how I think about mental health issues and faith. Let me try and paint the scene of what had just happened to Elijah, because it's the context that makes his breakdown even more shocking. Mount Carmel, or Caramel. Think ancient Thunderdome, but for prophets. See, Elijah challenges 450 prophets of Baal to contest, right? Whatever gods can light their sacrifice on fire wins. The losers, well, they don't walk away. The Baal prophets, they go first. They dance, they scream, they cut themselves, trying to get their god's attention. Nothing for hours. They're basically having a one-sided conversation with empty air while Elijah watches from the sidelines. And this is where Elijah starts trash talking. I'm not making this up. He literally suggests that maybe Baal is busy or is traveling or using the bathroom. The prophet of God is roasting these guys while they're bleeding and desperate. Then it's Elijah's turn. He douses his altar with water, fills trenches around it with water, makes it physically impossible under any normal circumstance for this altar to catch fire. And then he prays one simple prayer. And God, he sends fire that it doesn't just light the sacrifice, it incinerates everything. The bull, the wood, the stones, the dirt, all the water, the whole altar gets completely vaporized. The crowd starts to go insanely crazy. They fall on their faces screaming, "The Lord is God." This is the spiritual equivalent of the ultimate mic drop moment. Elijah had just proven beyond any shadow of a doubt that his God is the real God, and every other God is fake. Game over. Victory total. 450 false prophets executed. Revival sweeping the nation. This should have been the end of the story, right? The prophet rides off into the sunset, forever remembered as the guy who brought Israel back to God. But that's not what happens. Queen Jezebel, she hears about her prophets getting completely slaughtered, and she sends Elijah a message. By this time tomorrow, you'll be as dead as they are. End quote. And Elijah, this very same guy who just stared down 450 prophets without flinching, he completely falls apart. Not because the threat is so credible. Jezebel's been trying to kill him for years. Not because he's lost faith in God's protection. He's literally just watched God send fire from heaven He panics because something inside of him, it snapped. The text says Elijah ran for his life, not strategically retreated, not sought counsel, ran like prey running from a predator, 100 miles south, then another day's journey into the wilderness alone. And when he finally stops running, he sits under this pathetic little tree. The Hebrew word suggests it's barely big enough to provide any sort of shade. And he prays a beautifully honest prayer, one of the most beautiful in the entire Bible. Beautiful because of its raw honesty. Quote, "I've had enough, Lord. Take my life, for I am no better than my ancestors." End quote. This struck something inside of me when I first really read it, because this isn't, "God, help me through this hard time." This isn't, "Hey, give me strength to face tomorrow." This is straight up, "I quit. I can't do it anymore. Just kill me." Elijah isn't asking for healing. He's asking for an exit. And I know that feeling. I know what it's like when your brain convinces you that non-existence would be preferable to one more day of whatever's eating you alive from the inside. During my darkest years, I had nights when I'd lie on my bathroom floor at 3 a.m., so depressed that I couldn't even cry anymore. Just this gray, empty weight pressing down on every part of my body and my brain and my soul. And thoughts would whisper, what if you just don't wake up tomorrow? Not actively suicidal, just kind of passively hoping that the universe would make that choice for me. That's right where Elijah is, God's chosen prophet, fresh off the greatest victory of his career, begging his employer to fire him permanently. And what does God do? Well, here's where the story goes places I never expected. God doesn't rebuke him. He doesn't give him a lecture about faith. He doesn't remind him of all the miracles that he'd seen or that the people that were counting on him. Instead, an angel shows up and says, quote, "Get up and eat," end quote. That's it. No sermon, no intervention, just practical care for a broken human being. The angel has prepared a meal and brought water, fresh bread baked on hot coals. And after Elijah eats, he lies back down and goes to sleep. Think about that. God's response to his suicidal prophet is food and rest, the most human, basic care possible. And then the angel comes back. Elijah wakes up and there's another meal prepared. And the angel says, quote, "Get up and eat because the journey is too much for you," end quote. Not because you're being dramatic, not because you need to just snap out of it, because the journey is too much for you. God's acknowledging that what Elijah has been carrying is genuinely more than any human should have to bear. The isolation, the constant death threats, the weight of being the only prophet left standing, it's too much. And instead of shame or correction, God just provides supernatural care. See, Elijah eats the second meal and then he travels 40 days to Mount Horeb, the same mountain where Moses met God. And there, in a cave, God finally speaks to him, but not in the way that you'd expect. He says, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Not an accusation, it's an invitation. God's essentially saying, "Talk to me. What's really going on?" And Elijah unloads everything. The isolation, the fear, the sense that he's fighting alone while everybody else has given up. He says, "I'm the only one left who cares about you, and they're trying to kill me too." God's response? Well, it's to give Elijah a front row seat to the greatest natural disaster show on earth. Hurricane force winds that shatter rocks, an earthquake that splits the mountains, fire that consumes everything in sight. The text says something here that changed how I read the entire Bible. Quote, "The Lord was not in the wind. The Lord was not in the earthquake. The Lord was not in the fire," end quote. After all the cosmic drama dies down, there's a whisper. The Hebrew is almost untranslatable, a voice of gentle stillness, a sound so quiet you have to stop everything else to hear it. And that's where God was. See, this hit me like lightning because I'd been looking for God in all the wrong places during my own darkness. I thought he'd show up in some dramatic intervention, a burning bush moment that would instantly fix my brain chemistry and make everything else make sense. But what saved me, it wasn't thunder. It wasn't a miraculous healing or a supernatural experience. It was a friend who texted me at 2 a.m. just to check in. It was a therapist who said, "This isn't your fault." It was a change of lifestyle that slowly started to help my chemistry line back up the way it was supposed to. It was God whispering in the very quiet places in between storms. And here's what I love so much about this story. God doesn't just comfort Elijah. He gives him a mission that proves that he's not alone. Quote, "Go anoint 2 kings and train your replacement." And by the way, there are 7,000 people in Israel who haven't bowed to Baal. You're not the only one left. See, Elijah thought he was the last man standing. Turns out he was part of an army that he just couldn't see. Sometimes depression lies to us about how alone we really are. It whispers that nobody understands, nobody cares, nobody would miss you if you were gone. But there are 7,000 people in your story too. People you don't even know who are fighting the exact same fight. Complete strangers who understand your darkness because they've walked through their own. The prophet who wanted to die didn't die. He got fed. He got rest. He got a whisper that reminded him exactly who he was, and he kept going. Not because his circumstances changed. Queen Jezebel was still trying to kill him. The spiritual battles were still real. The weight of being a prophet, it was still crushing. But he learned that God's strength shows up differently than we'd expect. Sometimes it's fire from heaven. Sometimes it's bread baked on a stone and just permission to sleep. My friend, if you're in your own wilderness right now, if your success feels empty, if your fight feels impossible, if you're tired enough to quit everything, I need you to know something. The God who fed his suicidal prophet, he sees you too. The God who whispered to Elijah in his cave, he's whispering to you in yours as well. Maybe it's not dramatic. Maybe it's not the healing that you've prayed for. Maybe it's just someone who makes sure that you eat, someone who lets you sleep, someone who reminds you that the journey, it really is too much for any one person to try and carry alone. Elijah's story isn't about conquering or beating depression. It's about being held through it. It's about discovering that God's presence isn't always in an earthquake. Sometimes it's in the stillness that follows. Sometimes the most spiritual thing that you can do is the most human thing. Eat, sleep, and let someone take care of you. And listen for the whisper that says you're not alone. Because let's be honest, even God's strongest prophets, sometimes they need angel food, and there's no shame in that. Hey, my friend, I'm Adam with Faith Labs. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, thanks so much for hanging out. Make sure that you're subscribed or following the channel. And if you have a second to like, comment, and share on the video, it really does mean the world to me. It lets me know people are watching these things and it's maybe helping someone out there. We do daily devotionals and I can't wait to see you on tomorrow's. Until then, onward, and God bless you.